Sergeant mocked little girl for wearing glasses, until she hit every moving target on the field. The smirks came first, quiet, patronizing glances passed between officers as 12-year-old Mira Hallberg adjusted her thick glasses and politely asked to join the advanced firearms drill at Camp Grady. Sergeant Nolan Brandt scoffed loud enough for the whole unit to hear, declaring, "Targets don't stop for little girls who can't even see straight." What no one knew, what Mira never spoke of, was that her mother had been Captain Iris Hallberg, one of the most decorated and feared sharpshooters in the military's classified Black Echo Division. Trained in secret since childhood under her mother's meticulous guidance, Mira had mastered skills far beyond the comprehension of the very men mocking her. When Brandt finally allowed her one shot, what followed was not just an exhibition of impossible precision. It was the unraveling of a quiet legacy, one that would humble the entire camp and leave a decorated sergeant frozen in awe, eyes wide and unblinking. And before I forget, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. The sun bled low over Camp Grady, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete and worn sandbags of the southern training field. Recruits barked commands, boots hit dirt in rhythm, and the scent of burnt brass clung to the air like sweat. A cluster of soldiers stood near the edge of the rifle range, joking too loudly, oblivious to the stillness that had just entered the field. She was barely 5 feet tall, 12 years old at most, wearing an oversized olive jacket that swallowed her arms and a pair of round glasses that kept slipping down her nose. Her name was Mira Hallberg, and to most of the instructors watching from the shade of the command tent, she looked like someone's niece who'd wandered into the wrong place. But she hadn't wandered. She stood beside an older man, Colonel Ethan Hallberg, retired, limping, grizzled, with silver in his beard and silence in his eyes. He placed one hand on the girl's shoulder and said nothing. He didn't need to. The quiet carried weight. "Hey, Colonel," someone shouted from the crowd. "You bringing your grandkid to play soldier?" Laughter followed, some awkward, some amused, some cruel. Colonel Hallberg didn't respond. He just turned, gave Mira a small nod, and stepped back. The range master, Sergeant Kyle Brandt, leaned against a stack of crates, arms folded. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered, and proud of the stars sewn into his sleeve, he squinted at the girl like she was an ink smudge on a clean report. "You ever even held a real weapon before, kid?" he asked, voice coated in condescension. Mira pushed her glasses up, said nothing. She got a hearing problem too? Brandt barked toward the colonel. The old man's eyes, ice-pale and razor-sharp, locked on Brandt for a breath too long. But still, no reply. Brandt chuckled, gesturing toward the live-fire range behind them, where spinning targets, pop-up silhouettes, and moving dummies waited in restless silence. "Tell you what," he said, tossing a carbine toward her feet. "If you can even load that thing without dropping it, I'll buy you an ice cream." More laughter. One of the corporals nearby muttered, "Poor girl can barely see through those Coke bottles." Mira bent down, picked up the weapon, and when she stood, something shifted, not in her body, but in the air around her. Like the silence had started to listen. Mira Hallberg didn't flinch. She didn't glance at the mocking crowd. She didn't ask questions. Her fingers moved with quiet purpose, not fast, but deliberate. She inspected the carbine's chamber, clicked the bolt, and secured the magazine like someone performing a sacred ritual they'd repeated 1,000 times. Her face was blank, not from fear, but focus. Sergeant Brandt's smirk faltered for half a second. Colonel Hallberg had already stepped back to the tree line, standing with his arms behind his back, posture straight despite the limp in his right leg. He watched her now the way one watches a storm begin to roll across a quiet sky. Silent. Inevitable. "She's just mimicking what she saw online," Brandt muttered to the corporal beside him. "Bet she doesn't even know what zeroing means." But the corporal didn't laugh this time. He was watching Myra's hands, too. She adjusted the rifle stock, too big for her shoulder, and dropped to a knee beside the mark line. Her glasses glinted against the lowering sun. Still, not a word from her lips. The range tech tapped on his clipboard. "Targets live in 30 seconds. Brandt cleared his throat and shouted for the recruits to gather and watch. "Let's make this educational, folks. See what happens when someone walks in here thinking they're special." Mira exhaled slowly. Colonel Hallberg barely moved, but his thumb shifted, brushing against the dog tag on his wrist, looped there instead of around his neck. The edges were worn smooth from decades of pressure. The name etched into it was familiar to few. Captain Iris Hallberg, his daughter, Myra's mother. A flicker crossed the old man's eyes, but only for a moment. The first target whipped up, a silhouette with 3-second visibility. Crack. Direct hit, center mass. The tech blinked. Brant's voice caught in his throat. The second target was smaller, moved left to right with stuttering speed. Crack. It dropped before it reached the halfway point. Mira adjusted nothing. Her breath remained steady. Her stance, while unusual, low, and slightly offset, was efficient. There was no tremble in her shoulders. No strain. By the 6th hit, no one was laughing anymore. By the 9th, not a single soldier made a sound. By the 12th, Sergeant Brant's arms were no longer crossed. And Mira, quiet, bespectacled Mira, hadn't spoken a single word. But the field had. It had started to whisper her name. After the 12th shot, Mira gently eased the rifle down. Not dropped. Not thrown. Placed. She stood up slowly, brushing dust from the knees of her cargo pants, glasses sliding slightly again. But she didn't adjust them this time. Her breathing was still calm. No triumph. No adrenaline flush. Just that same quiet composure. Colonel Hallberg gave a single nod from the tree line. Approval, not pride. Permission, not praise. Sergeant Brant still hadn't moved. The rest of the watching soldiers, a mix of active duty and reserve, had gone entirely still. They looked at each other like they were waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. The girl with the oversized jacket and thick glasses had just cleared a field of moving targets like she'd done it 100 times. Because she had. And the jacket, now that some of them noticed, wasn't just army surplus. It bore a small, faded patch sewn above the chest pocket. A name, nearly unreadable. The letters, I, Hallberg, ghosted in sun-bleached thread. Brant stepped forward now, trying to recover the room. All right, he said, forcing a smirk, some lucky shots. Not bad for someone her size. Still, Mira said nothing. She just turned, started walking toward the colonel, hands relaxed, expression unreadable. A private near the back leaned toward his buddy and whispered, "Did you see her stance? That's a tactical low base, not sports shooting." His friend whispered back, "She didn't miss. Not once." Behind her, the range tech stepped out from the booth, frowning down at his monitor. "Sergeant," he called hesitantly, I think we had a system error." Brant turned, grateful for a distraction. "Error." The tech pointed at the log. "It's showing all targets hit in under 1.5 seconds. From trigger to reset. That's not possible at her age." "She's using that odd grip," someone else muttered. Colonel Hallberg finally stepped forward, his boots crunching lightly in the gravel. He didn't look at the tech, didn't look at Brant. He stopped beside Mira and laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "She doesn't shoot for numbers," he said, voice low, gravel deep. "She was trained for one thing." "And what's that supposed to be?" Brant challenged. The colonel looked at him then, eyes like frozen steel. "Not missing." The range fell silent again, but this time it wasn't awkward or confused, it was reverent. A pause held in air like a collective breath no one dared to exhale. Mira looked up at her grandfather, gave a small nod, and turned to leave the firing line. Sergeant Brant stared after her, lips slightly parted as if words had been stolen from his mouth before they ever formed. The others watched her, too. The girl who had just dismantled every expectation without raising her voice once. Colonel Hallberg walked behind her, slow and deliberate, every step etched with memory. Each movement felt like a history lesson buried in scars. "She's not military," Brant finally said, louder now. "She's not enlisted. That was just a stunt." No one agreed. No one disagreed either. Because they didn't know. Not yet. It was Specialist Amy Delgado, a young medic stationed at Grady, who noticed the small symbol stitched at the corner of Myra's sleeve, almost invisible unless you were trained to see it. A faded dagger over a set of wings. And above it, 3 tiny stars, hand-stitched. "That's not standard issue," Delgado whispered. She remembered seeing it once, in a photo framed on the wall of the colonel's office. A black-and-white shot of a woman kneeling in front of a helicopter, rifle across her back, arm around a baby wrapped in green. The woman had that same insignia. Captain Iris Hallberg. The field hadn't just watched a kid perform. It had watched her daughter's daughter echo every motion her mother once taught in the dark corners of foreign deserts. Every breath Mira took behind the rifle had been borrowed from a lineage carved by precision and pain. And suddenly, the glasses didn't look awkward. They looked like the last thing Mira had left of her mother, a mother who never came home from her final deployment. Colonel Hallberg adjusted his cap, turning once more toward the crowd. No one asked her to prove anything, he said, voice steady. She's here because I needed a place quiet enough to remember her mother. That's all. But Brant tried to interject. Hallberg's eyes leveled him. You asked if she'd held a weapon before. I'll answer you now, he said quietly. She learned to shoot before she learned to read. Then he turned, and Mira followed. And the silence followed them both. Sergeant Kyle Brant wasn't used to silence. Not from subordinates. Not from crowds. And certainly not from the kind of young girl he'd just tried to humble in front of half the base. He stood there, rooted to the dirt, still clutching the clipboard he hadn't used. His jaw tensed and released, over and over, like he was trying to chew his way through what had just happened. A 12-year-old girl had walked onto his range, said nothing, and left a hole in his authority big enough to march a battalion through. She didn't flinch, one of the younger recruits muttered. Didn't even hesitate on the lateral drift target, said another. Brant heard every word, and it stung. He turned sharply and started walking toward the barracks, the crowd parting without a sound. His boots hammered the ground with more force than necessary, but it was the only control he felt like he still had. Inside the small ready room, he slammed the door behind him and tossed the clipboard on the desk. The screen on the range monitor still showed the impossible string of hits, every one center mass or dead-eye perfect. He sat, elbows on knees, face buried in his palms. It wasn't just that she had outshot his expectations. She had done it with the weight of something ancient behind her. Something earned, not taught. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a photo. Worn, frayed edges. For soldiers, one of them younger him, standing beside a downed hello in Kandahar. At the center was a woman with the kind of posture that made everyone else look like they were playing dress-up. Captain Iris Hallberg. He hadn't known her well. Few did. But her name moved through the ranks like a myth you whispered in hushed tones. Sniper, tactician, ghost. The kind of soldier whose reputation outlived her own file. Brant had heard she died during a Black Ops evac gone wrong. Rumors circled about her daughter, but no one had ever confirmed it. No one had to. Now it all made sense. The jacket, the stance, the silence. He hadn't just mocked a child. He'd challenged a legacy. And whether he'd meant to or not, he owed her more than a sarcastic smile and an ice cream joke. He owed her respect. But the question clawed at his pride. How do you apologize to a ghost? Later that evening, the sun dipped beneath the wire fencing of Camp Grady, painting the horizon in dusky red. Most of the day's recruits had cleared the field, leaving only the whisper of wind and the distant echo of range cleanup. But Sergeant Brant couldn't sleep. He had spent years commanding that field, training soldiers, correcting posture, barking through drills until even the most arrogant rookies fell in line. He'd believed in that authority, in the unshakable certainty of rank and repetition. And yet today, a 12-year-old girl in glasses had walked onto his field and done what no one else had ever done. Made him feel irrelevant. He found her again just before sunset. Not at the range. Not with her grandfather. But on the old bleachers that faced west, sitting with her knees drawn up, the jacket bunched around her like armor. She was alone, watching the fading sky. Brant approached without the bark this time. No clipboard. No crowd. Just the man behind the name tag. His shadow fell over the bleacher rail, but Mira didn't turn. I wasn't trying to be cruel, he started. She didn't reply. He shifted awkwardly. I've seen a lot of kids come through this place thinking they're ready. Most of them aren't. You can't afford softness in a fight. I thought I was helping. Still nothing. Then she spoke, softly. You laughed before I even picked up the rifle. The words weren't angry. They weren't even bitter. Just true. Brant winced. You're right. I did. She looked at him then. Her eyes behind the lenses were not glassy or childish. They were measured. Quiet. Knowing. My mom used to say, Mira murmured, respect is a weapon. It cuts deepest when it's earned, not given. Brant sat slowly on the edge of the bench, leaving distance between them. Your mother was something else, he said finally. Mira nodded once. She never liked talking about it. They sat in silence for a while. Is that her jacket? He asked gently. She used to wear it when she'd clean her rifle, Mira said, fingers tracing the frayed sleeve. It still smells like CLP and pine needles. That detail hit him harder than he expected. I crossed a line today, he said after a pause. I thought I was teaching discipline. Turns out, I got a lesson in it instead. Myra's voice was almost a whisper. You didn't cross it. You just didn't see it. And for the first time in years, Sergeant Brandt had no comeback. Only silence. Word traveled fast through Camp Grady. By the next morning, Mira Hallberg's name had become something more than a passing curiosity. Not because she bragged. She hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to anyone else on base. And not because Colonel Hallberg said anything. He hadn't. He didn't have to. The whispers did it for them. She's the daughter of Captain Iris Hallberg. No way. The ghost sniper. I watched her clear that range like it was a game. You're lying. She hit every moving target. Didn't miss. Not once. Even those who hadn't seen it began to act differently around her. Not out of fear. Not even awe, exactly. But something quieter. A kind of instinctive recognition. Like seeing a scar and knowing there's a story behind it you wouldn't dare ask about. At breakfast, Mira sat alone at a table near the corner. Her tray had barely been touched. She didn't look up when people passed. But they noticed her. And she noticed them noticing, not with arrogance, but quiet awareness. When a corporal named Reese dropped his water bottle and it rolled to her feet, she picked it up without hesitation, handed it back, and nodded. He blinked. Thanks. She nodded again and returned to her untouched oatmeal. It wasn't much, but it shifted something. In the classroom where recruits drilled through tactics simulations, Mira sat in the back, notebook open, silently sketching diagrams of overlapping fields of fire. When the instructor paused the screen, asking a question no one answered, Mira raised a hand. Your arcs are reversed, she said gently. That's a crossfire risk. The instructor looked taken aback. She's right, murmured someone in the front. Mira flipped her notebook toward the light, her handwriting clean, precise, the angles diagrammed exactly. She didn't argue, didn't seek credit. She just saw things other people missed. And quietly, almost imperceptibly, the room adjusted to her. At the rifle shed later, an older gunnery sergeant passed her, glanced down at her stance, and simply said, You've had good training. Mira didn't reply, but she did glance toward the far fence, where her grandfather leaned against a post, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He gave her a subtle nod, once. Approval, again. A legacy didn't shout. It didn't boast. It just made people change the way they stood when you entered a room. The following day brought wind and gray skies over Camp Grady, but inside the modular combat hall, the atmosphere was warmer than usual, quieter, even thoughtful. Mira sat near the exit doors, fiddling with a scope pulled from a broken training rifle. Her fingers moved with surgical calm, adjusting tension screws most recruits never even noticed. The optic was cracked, useless to most, but she kept turning it in her palm, eyes scanning for possibilities. Watching her from across the room was Staff Sergeant Elena Vickers, a hardened infantry trainer with 15 years under her belt and a permanent crease in her brow. She'd seen more than her share of hotshots and prodigies, but something about Mira gave her pause. It wasn't her skill. Not just that. It was the posture, the silence, the restraint. Vickers had seen that once before, in a woman who used to walk the base with barely a whisper and yet commanded more respect than a general. Captain Iris Hallberg. Vickers approached slowly, boots clicking against the linoleum as she crossed the room. Mira noticed, looked up. Vickers nodded to the scope. What's wrong with it? Rear lens is fogged. Mount's bent. Rubber seals are dry-rotted, Mira said, calm and clear. But if you shave the rail and reverse the lock plate, it could hold 0. At short range. Vickers blinked. Who taught you that? Mira shrugged. No one taught me. I used to fix Mom's gear when she was tired. Vickers crouched, studied the girl's hands. Scarred at the knuckles, not from fighting, but from tools. She'd spent years around weapons, not just holding them, but caring for them, respecting them. I knew your mother, Vickers said softly. She didn't speak much either. She didn't have to, Mira replied. People listened anyway. That landed. Vickers exhaled, sat beside her. When she deployed last, I remember seeing her at chow. She gave me her protein bar without a word, then asked me what I'd do if a child ever walked into a war zone. Mira looked up. What did you say? She asked. Vickers smiled faintly. I said, I'd get them out. She said, no. You teach them to see it coming before it ever starts. Mira nodded once. She was already sick then, she said, almost inaudibly. That silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with memory. And Vickers, for the first time in years, felt that same chill at the back of her neck. The ghost was still here, just wearing glasses now. By late afternoon, Mira was back on the field, but this time the crowd was smaller and more intentional. Not gawkers, not skeptics, soldiers, instructors, a few off-duty officers standing casually near the fence, pretending not to watch. They all were. She was kneeling again, not on the firing line this time, but on a workbench near the range sheds, reassembling a trigger group. The weapon wasn't hers. It belonged to one of the younger recruits who had bent the trigger pin during cleaning. Mira had noticed it, said nothing, just quietly took it, sat down, and started fixing it. Behind her, conversations paused, just slightly, as people passed. Is that the Hallberg kid? Someone whispered. Yeah. Saw her shoot 2 days ago. Still thinking about it. Sergeant Brandt stood further back, arms crossed, watching. Not judging this time, studying. Trying to understand the thing that had unfolded right under his command. Every time he looked at her, he saw the moment he underestimated her flash behind his eyes. It haunted him, not because of pride, but because it had revealed something he didn't like about himself. The kind of blindness that doesn't come from lack of sight, but lack of depth. You ever see someone like that before? He asked softly. Specialist Delgado, standing beside him, didn't answer at first. Then she nodded. Once. But she wasn't 12. Mira finished reassembling the mechanism and handed it back to the recruit without ceremony. Next time, align the spring first. You'll feel it catch, she said, barely above a whisper. The recruit, a tall, broad-shouldered kid named Hayes, took it slowly, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to being corrected by someone half his height. Thanks. Mira just nodded and walked off, eyes scanning the field, posture straight. The other recruits made room. No one said a word, but they moved. Subtle things were happening now. People who once ignored her were now letting her pass first. Those who would have dismissed her were now second-guessing their own assumptions. Mira hadn't demanded space. She hadn't raised her voice. But space had been given. Respect, like shadow, doesn't need light to exist. Just presence. And as Mira stood near the range boundary, the weight of eyes on her back wasn't uncomfortable. It was earned. Night came soft and slow over Camp Grady. Inside the temporary housing unit reserved for visiting personnel, Mira sat cross-legged on her cot, a worn green duffel open beside her. She pulled from it a long, hard-sided rifle case, scratched, faded, with a dent near the hinge and a single crimson thread tied around the handle. She ran her fingers across it. Then, carefully, she opened it. Inside lay a rifle, old but immaculate, custom-built, matte finish, reinforced stock. Beside it, a folded cloth wrapped around a single photo, a patch, and a laminated ID. Captain Iris Hallberg. The photo was creased, her mother, in desert fatigues, crouched in front of a Humvee, smiling faintly. Mira was barely visible in the corner of the shot, a toddler holding a plastic wrench. She held the photo carefully, the way some people hold prayer cards. Not because it was fragile, but because the memory inside it was. Colonel Hallberg sat nearby, polishing a small leather-bound journal with a cloth. He wasn't looking at her, but his presence filled the room. She carried that rifle longer than I carried my first command, he said quietly. Mira nodded, but didn't speak. She never missed, he added. Not because she was perfect, because she knew what it cost. Myra's fingers hovered over the bolt. She didn't pull it, just traced the etching at the top, 3 initials, IH. Colonel Hallberg finally looked over. Do you want to know the first time she used it? Mira glanced up. She was 20, he said. An ambush in Kandahar. Squad was pinned. She climbed a ridge under fire. For shots. For silences. And then, she didn't speak for 3 days. Mira blinked slowly. Was she afraid? She asked. Hallberg leaned back, eyes far away. Yes, but she never let fear make her loud. She let it make her careful. Silence settled again, heavy but not harsh. She taught me to breathe through my feet, Mira whispered. The colonel raised a brow. Through your feet, she said. When you're scared, the air gets trapped up here. Mira tapped her chest, so push it down. Through your feet. Let the earth carry it. The colonel smiled, faint and proud. That sounds like her. Mira wrapped the rifle in the cloth again, careful as ever, then placed the photo back inside. She's the reason I see clear, she said softly, even when everything else blurs. And behind those lenses, the weight of a ghost looked back at her. The morning air was crisp, biting lightly at exposed skin and filling the lungs with sharp clarity. Camp Grady's outdoor training course lay before them, a daunting array of obstacles designed to test strength, agility, and endurance. The usual chatter of recruits was replaced by an expectant hush. Word had spread quickly about Mira Hallberg, the quiet girl with glasses who had shattered every expectation in just a few days. Sergeant Kyle Brandt stood near the starting line, clipboard tucked under one arm, but forgotten for the moment. His eyes traced the lean figure before him. Mira, now without her oversized jacket, standing tall and steady with her glasses firmly in place. There was no longer any hiding behind excess gear or youthful innocence. Just a poised, focused girl carrying the weight of a legacy on her small shoulders. Brandt cleared his throat, his voice lacking the usual edge of authority, softened instead by something close to respect. All right, Hallberg, you ready? Mira didn't reply with words. Instead, she gave a subtle nod, her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes fixed ahead. The whistle blew, sharp, decisive. With a controlled burst, Mira surged forward, every movement precise and economical. She scaled the towering walls without hesitation, hands gripping the rough surfaces like seasoned rock climbers. Under the low-hanging nets, she crawled smoothly, barely disturbing the dust beneath her. When it was time to swing across the ropes, her muscles flexed methodically, landing silently on the far side. Around her, other recruits struggled, their motions hurried, erratic, and noisy. Their heavy breaths and unsteady landings stood in stark contrast to Myra's composed rhythm. At the narrow balance beam, where most faltered under pressure, Myra's arms remained calm at her sides. Her eyes scanned the path ahead with the cool calculation of someone trained to measure every step, considering weight distribution, muscle tension, and even the subtle gusts of wind that could throw off balance. She moved deliberately, yet faster than anyone had expected. Landing firmly, she sprinted the final 50 yards toward the finish line. A heavy silence blanketed the onlookers. No cheers, no whistles, no mocking snickers. Only stunned, breath-held acknowledgement. Sergeant Brandt stepped forward, his usual stern expression softened into something almost like admiration. Not bad for a kid, he said quietly. Mira looked at him directly, her eyes steady and unwavering. Not just a kid, she said softly. The simple, powerful words hung between them like an unspoken pact. Brandt nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through his usual reserve. You're right. Not just a kid. In that moment, the crowd didn't just see a young girl. They saw a warrior born, silent but unyielding. The lesson was clear. Respect isn't a gift given lightly. It's earned, step by step, breath by breath, action by action. And Mira Hallberg was just beginning to earn hers. The barracks were quiet now, the harsh fluorescent lights dimming one by one as night folded its shadow over Camp Grady. Inside, Mira Hallberg sat on her bunk, her knees drawn close to her chest, eyes tracing the peeling paint on the ceiling above. The day's events, her silent victories and the unspoken challenges, settled around her like a heavy cloak, not with pride, but with a weight that felt far older than her 12 years. Beside her lay a worn, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and frayed. The faded handwriting belonged to her mother, Captain Iris Hallberg, a name whispered with reverence among soldiers but cloaked in mystery at home. Myra's fingers carefully turned the fragile sheets, reading and rereading a passage she had memorized long ago. Fear isn't the enemy, hesitation is. When the world tightens around you, breathe through your feet. Let the earth steady your hands and mind. The words echoed softly in the quiet room, a mantra forged in fire and loss. Mira closed the journal gently, her thoughts heavy with what was left unsaid. A soft knock at the door stirred her from reverie. Colonel Ethan Hallberg entered quietly, carrying a faded black and white photograph. Without a word, he settled beside her and offered the photo. It showed a younger Iris, standing in desert fatigues with a rifle slung low across her back, her gaze fixed on some distant horizon, steady, unreadable, yet fierce. Iris kept her burdens quiet. The colonel said, his voice rough with emotion, thickened by years of grief. She never asked for recognition. She only wanted to be understood. Mira met her grandfather's eyes, seeing the same resilience reflected in them. "I'm not just fighting for myself," she whispered. "I'm fighting to honor her, to carry her story." The colonel's expression softened, pride mingling with sorrow. "And that makes all the difference. You carry more than a rifle or a legacy. You carry a promise." Outside, the camp was cloaked in darkness, the distant hum of generators and the occasional bark of orders barely piercing the night. But within that stillness, the echoes of courage, sacrifice, and silent determination lived on, weaving through generations like a whispered vow. Mira looked toward the window, her glasses catching the faint glow of moonlight. She wasn't just a girl with thick lenses or a faded jacket. She was the living thread between past and future, the quiet force ready to face whatever came next. Her journey had only just begun. Morning light broke cold and sharp over Camp Grady, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of the training grounds. Word of Mira Hallberg's uncanny marksmanship had traveled swiftly, unsettling some, inspiring others, but mostly leaving the camp abuzz with whispered speculation. Sergeant Kyle Brandt felt the weight of that growing attention like a pressure on his chest. He was a man who thrived on control, on order, and for the first time in years, that control was slipping. Determined to reclaim his authority, Brandt watched Mira from a distance as she sat quietly cleaning her gear near the edge of the training yard. The day before, she'd conquered the obstacle course with unyielding precision. Now, Brandt had set a new challenge, one designed to test not just accuracy, but calm under fire, precision in motion. He approached her, his footsteps deliberate but cautious, eyes narrowed in thought. "All right, Hallberg," he said, his tone firm but measured. "You've shown you can hit stationary targets. Let's see how you handle live-fire drills on the move. Precision isn't just about marksmanship, it's about discipline. No hesitation, no misses. Miss a target, and you're done." Mira looked up from her cloth, steady gaze meeting his without a trace of fear or arrogance. "I'm ready," she replied, voice quiet but clear. Word spread quickly, and within minutes a crowd of soldiers and instructors gathered around, forming a semicircle that hummed with tension and curiosity. They had witnessed Myra's uncanny accuracy on the static range. Now they were about to watch her perform under pressure. Brandt set up a series of pop-up targets spaced unevenly along a winding course, some moving laterally, others popping up unpredictably. The drills simulated real-world unpredictability, the chaos of combat, where calm resolve could be the difference between life and death. The whistle blew sharp. Mira exploded into motion, moving with a fluid grace that belied her youth. Her boots pounded lightly against the ground, weaving through obstacles with practiced ease. Rifle raised steadily, she tracked each target, eyes narrowing behind thick lenses that gleamed with focused intensity. Crack! First target down. Crack! Second target gone. Crack! Third. The rhythm was unbroken, every shot a perfect center mass hit. The crowd fell utterly silent. Brandt's jaw clenched. He admired the skill but couldn't let it show. "You've got skill," he finally admitted, voice low, begrudging. Mira met his eyes calmly. "Skill without discipline is just luck." For the first time, Brandt saw beyond the glasses, the age, the quiet demeanor. He saw a soldier, disciplined, precise, unshakable. And with that, the camp began to shift. Whispers became nods. Skepticism gave way to respect. The quiet girl was no longer just a name whispered in doubt. She was becoming a legend in the making. The days following the live-fire drill brought an unusual stillness over Camp Grady. The usual banter among recruits, the teasing, the casual dismissiveness, had all but faded, replaced by a subtle, watchful silence that seemed to hang in the air. Soldiers moved with a new awareness, as if the ground beneath their feet had shifted ever so slightly, though no one could quite explain why. Mira moved through the camp like a shadow, present but never loud, seen but rarely addressed. She kept to herself, quietly practicing drills and cleaning her gear with meticulous care. Yet every glance she received, every sidelong look shared in the mess hall or barracks, carried a weight far heavier than words. It was respect. Not the kind demanded by rank or ceremony, but the kind earned through presence and quiet strength. Colonel Ethan Hallberg noticed the change too. At morning briefings, he often found his eyes lingering on his granddaughter, seated calm and composed in the back row. He watched how others tried to catch her gaze and quickly looked away, uncertain whether to approach or give her space. Even the most seasoned soldiers seemed unsure how to interact with someone who carried such an unmistakable legacy with humility and grace. One afternoon, Mira sought solitude in the camp's small chapel, a place she seldom visited but felt drawn to in moments of reflection. The chapel was simple and worn, its walls lined with old stone and stained glass that filtered light in muted colors. She knelt silently, hands folded over a worn prayer book that once belonged to her mother. The scent of aged paper and faint incense enveloped her, a fragile shield against the weight of her thoughts. Her breathing slowed, steadying as she centered herself. In the quiet, memories swirled, of loss, of sacrifice, and the unspoken promise she carried. She whispered a single name, her voice barely audible, "Mom." Suddenly, footsteps echoed softly on the stone floor. Staff Sergeant Elena Vickers entered quietly, her presence steady but respectful. She paused near the entrance, watching Mira for a moment before speaking softly. "You carry her well," Vickers said, her voice low but sincere. Mira looked up, meeting Vickers's gaze with a flicker of gratitude and something deeper, understanding. "I try," she replied simply. Vickers nodded slowly. "Your mother taught me something once. True strength isn't in how loudly you fight. It's in how steadily you stand when the world tries to break you." Myra's fingers tightened around the prayer book. The weight of those words settled deep. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Vickers offered a faint smile before turning to leave. In that small chapel, surrounded by shadows and soft light, two warriors connected, not by rank or years, but by legacy and quiet understanding. Outside, the camp continued its slow transformation, and Mira stood at the center of it all, silent, steady, unbroken. The air at Camp Grady was thick with tension, as if the very atmosphere had been charged overnight. Sergeant Kyle Brandt sensed it the moment he stepped onto the range that morning. The usual steady hum of confidence among the ranks had faded, replaced by murmurs and stolen glances. His once unshakable authority now felt fragile, like a castle built on shifting sands. The whispers followed him, subtle but unmistakable: doubt, skepticism, and a growing awareness that something was changing, something he hadn't fully grasped yet. But while Brandt wrestled with the storm brewing inside him, Mira Hallberg moved through the day with unyielding calm. Her presence was a quiet anchor in the swirling uncertainty, her every action deliberate and precise. Her posture never faltered. Her gaze remained steady behind her thick glasses. The weight of the legacy she carried was invisible to many but palpable in every controlled breath she took. Brandt knew he couldn't let things slide any longer. If he wanted to maintain order, he had to push harder, not just physically, but psychologically. He had to test her limits, see if her quiet confidence held when the pressure truly mounted. During the midday drill, Brandt called Mira forward. His voice was clipped, edged with the sternness of command. "If you think marksmanship is enough, then let's see how you handle endurance. You'll run the timed endurance course, all while maintaining steady aim. Miss a target, and you're out." Mira didn't hesitate. She nodded once, a quiet acceptance of the challenge. The whistle blew sharp and clear. She launched forward with steady determination. Each stride burned her muscles. Each breath demanded focus. Yet, despite the fatigue that clawed at her limbs, Myra's movements remained fluid and precise. Her rifle stayed raised, eyes locked on moving targets that popped up unpredictably along the course. Crack, crack, crack. Every shot was clean, every target down without fail. The crowd watched in breathless silence, tension mounting with each passing second. No one dared cheer, no one dared whisper. The weight of respect, hard-earned and profound, settled over them all. When Mira finally crossed the finish line, the room seemed to collectively exhale. Sergeant Brandt approached, the hard edge of his usual demeanor softened by grudging admiration. "You're stronger than I thought," he admitted quietly. Mira met his gaze, voice soft but unwavering. "Strength alone isn't enough. Discipline is everything. In that moment, the balance shifted irrevocably. The camp stopped questioning. Instead, they watched, waiting to see what this quiet, determined girl would do next. The dawn was pale and hesitant as the soldiers gathered at Camp Grady's firing range. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of charged silence that speaks louder than words. Today was the day everyone had been waiting for, the moment when whispers of doubt and underestimation would finally meet the truth. Mira Hallberg stood alone at the firing line, the weight of her rifle comfortable in her hands. Her glasses caught the morning light, casting subtle reflections, but her eyes were clear and unyielding. Around her, seasoned soldiers, instructors, and officers exchanged nervous glances. Some doubted, others hoped to see something extraordinary. The tension was a quiet roar. Sergeant Kyle Brandt stood behind her, his jaw tight. He had tested her endurance, her skill, and her discipline. Yet now, faced with her calm determination, he found himself unsure of what to expect. The drill master's voice cut through the silence. Moving targets. Variable speeds. 2 minutes. Hit every target. No excuses. Mira took a slow, measured breath, feeling the gravel under her boots. She adjusted her grip, the rifle's familiar weight grounding her. The legacy of her mother and grandfather was more than a memory. It was a steady presence guiding her hands. The targets began to pop up, some close, some far, some slow, others darting with sudden speed. Each demanded perfect timing, unerring focus. Crack. The first shot rang out, clean and true. The target dropped. Crack. Crack. One by one, each bullet found its mark, each target falling in precise succession. Mira moved with fluid grace, her breathing controlled, body steady. Despite the rising pressure, her rhythm never faltered. The crowd remained silent, captivated by the unfolding display of skill. Eyes narrowed in concentration, breaths held tight. Time seemed to slow as Mira worked through the course. When the final target dropped, the range was silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, slowly, a murmur began to swell, a wave of respect rising from the crowd. Sergeant Brandt exhaled deeply, stepping forward. His voice was low, sincere, almost reverent. "Hallberg," he said, meeting her steady gaze, "you didn't just hit every target. You changed the game." Mira lowered her rifle without a hint of triumph, only quiet resolve. Her victory wasn't loud or boastful. It was precise and profound. In that moment, everyone understood. The girl behind the glasses was more than just skilled. She was legacy, discipline, strength. And from this day forward, she would no longer be overlooked. The silence that settled over Camp Grady after Myra's flawless performance was not empty. It was dense with a quiet, profound understanding. It was the kind of silence that speaks louder than cheers or applause. The murmurs of skepticism, the sideways glances, and the whispered doubts had all but vanished. In their place was a new respect, a respect born not from empty words, but from the undeniable truth everyone had just witnessed. Sergeant Kyle Brandt stood motionless for a long moment, the weight of his earlier arrogance beginning to dissolve into something closer to humility. His jaw, once clenched in stubborn resistance, relaxed as he finally found the words. When he spoke, his voice was softer, stripped of its usual edge of command. "You've earned your place here, Hallberg. No one can question that anymore." Mira simply nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without fanfare. She understood that this moment was not a conclusion, but a milestone, a single step on a long road ahead. The real challenge lay in the slow, steady process of proving herself day after day, of earning the trust and respect of those around her beyond one extraordinary performance. Around the camp, subtle but significant changes began to ripple outward. Conversations once laced with condescension and dismissal now included cautious admiration. New recruits glanced her way with silent curiosity, and seasoned soldiers who once viewed her as an anomaly started to reconsider what strength truly meant. Respect, after all, was not a given. It had to be earned, and Mira was doing just that with every quiet act of discipline. Colonel Ethan Hallberg approached her, the pride in his eyes unmistakable but tempered with solemnity. His voice carried the weight of family legacy and unspoken sacrifice. "You carry more than our name, Mira. You carry the weight of our family's honor. Remember, It's never just skill that defines a soldier, it's the heart behind it. Myra's gaze dropped momentarily, the gravity of those words sinking deep into her bones. She had inherited more than a name or a legacy rifle. She had inherited a promise. A promise to stand steady when the world tried to break her, to embody resilience and quiet strength even when unseen. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the camp, Mira stood alone near the fence, the fading light catching on her glasses. Her presence was calm, unassuming, but it shone brighter than any accolade or shout. In that quiet strength was a future forged, not in loud declarations, but in steady, unbreakable resolve. The afternoon sun poured relentlessly over Camp Grady's firing range, casting long, sharp shadows across the gravel and worn wood. The day's drills had come to an end, but the lingering energy in the air was far from spent. The soldiers who had gathered watched Mira Hallberg with a mixture of awe and newfound respect, their earlier skepticism replaced by quiet admiration. Yet, even with her flawless performance, there was still something unsaid, an unspoken history waiting to surface. Colonel Ethan Hallberg called the soldiers together beneath the shade of the mess hall's canopy, his steps measured and deliberate. The crowd gathered, hushed voices weaving through the ranks, curiosity simmering just beneath the surface. In his hands, the colonel held a weathered, leather-bound folder that had clearly seen better days. Its edges were frayed, and the leather softened by time and countless handling. He opened the folder carefully, revealing faded black and white photographs, gleaming medals, and a worn set of dog tags, the physical remnants of a legacy that had been quietly passed down. His voice was steady but heavy with emotion as he addressed the crowd. This, Colonel Hallberg began, holding up a photograph of a younger woman in desert fatigues, eyes fierce and unyielding, belonged to Captain Iris Hallberg. Your mother, Mira. Myra's breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked onto the image, a warrior etched in time, a reflection of strength and sacrifice she carried in her own heart. The room grew silent, the weight of history settling over every listener like a solemn vow. Iris was more than a marksman, the colonel continued. She was a leader in impossible situations, a force who never sought recognition but earned it through courage and sacrifice that few ever saw. Her actions saved lives, and her legacy is the quiet foundation of the respect you now witness. Soldiers leaned closer, absorbing the gravity of the truth that had long remained hidden beneath the surface. Sergeant Brandt stepped forward, voice low and tinged with regret. I didn't know. The colonel nodded gravely. If you did, it's a reminder that sometimes the quietest among us carry the heaviest burdens, and that strength is often found in silence. Mira met the eyes of her comrades, feeling their respect deepen, not just for her, but for the lineage she bore silently, behind thick glasses and a composed exterior. In that moment, the truth was no longer hidden or whispered in shadows. It stood revealed, powerful, unyielding, and undeniable. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows over Camp Grady as the weight of the day's revelations settled over the assembled soldiers. The crowd, once restless with whispers and veiled skepticism, had grown quiet, an unspoken reverence filling the air. The name, Iris Hallberg, had been spoken aloud, carrying with it decades of sacrifice, courage, and unyielding strength. And now, that legacy had been passed down in the form of Mira, standing quietly among them. Sergeant Kyle Brandt lingered at the edge of the gathering, his usual swagger subdued. The armor of arrogance he once wore had cracked, worn away by the undeniable truth he had witnessed. His eyes, once sharp with challenge, now held something far softer: respect, humility, and an unspoken apology. No words were exchanged between him and Mira, but the silence between them was a truce forged in the fires of shared recognition. He saw her now not as a mere child or a curiosity, but as a true comrade, a soldier who carried not only skill but the weight of legacy and loss. Mira stood tall, though she carried no pride in her posture. Her expression was calm, dignified, and deeply introspective. The thick lenses of her glasses caught the fading light, reflecting a clarity not of weakness, but of vision, clear, focused, and unyielding. She was the quiet center of the storm, steady and unmoved, embodying the strength that had long been overlooked. A hush fell over the camp as Colonel Ethan Hallberg stepped forward once more. His voice was soft, but carried the weight of generations. "This moment is not about glory or accolades," he said solemnly, "but about remembering what true strength looks like, the courage to stand firm, steady, and silent when no one else is watching." That silence stretched out, profound and full of meaning. It was not emptiness, but a presence, a collective acknowledgement of sacrifice and honor that words could never fully capture. The soldiers, old and young, felt the gravity of history pressing gently upon them, binding them together through shared respect. Myra's eyes flicked briefly toward the crowd, then lowered in quiet acceptance. The burden and blessing of her lineage settled around her like a protective mantle. Camp Grady had changed, not with loud fanfare or hollow applause, but with the steady power of truth, presence, and unspoken understanding. And in that stillness, Mira reclaimed her honor, dignity, and the legacy of every silent warrior who came before her. The sun had fully dipped below the horizon, leaving Camp Grady bathed in the soft blue hues of twilight. The training grounds, once filled with the sound of drills and commands, were now quiet except for the gentle rustling of leaves stirred by a cool evening breeze. Mira Hallberg stood alone near the perimeter fence, her silhouette calm and steady against the fading light. Behind her, the darkening sky stretched wide and unbroken, a silent witness to the trials and triumphs of the day. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the worn dog tags hanging from a chain around her neck, the same tags that had belonged to her mother. The smooth, familiar weight was a quiet anchor, grounding her in the legacy she carried so humbly but fiercely. The tag wasn't just a relic. It was a promise, a symbol of strength forged through sacrifice and unyielding resolve. Around the camp, the subtle shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. The soldiers who had once cast sideways glances of doubt and whispered quietly about the girl with the glasses now looked toward her with something deeper, a respectful silence that spoke volumes. It was a transformation born not of boastfulness, but of earned trust and witnessed skill. The camp was no longer just a place of training but a space where quiet courage was recognized and valued. Mira adjusted her glasses, feeling the familiar strap of her rifle resting against her shoulder. She didn't seek attention or praise. Her journey had never been about proving herself to others. Instead, it was about carrying a legacy with dignity, one of discipline, resilience, and quiet strength. Her actions had spoken clearly enough. The breeze shifted again, carrying the scent of pine and earth, mixing with the fading warmth of the day. Mira took a deep breath, letting the stillness seep into her bones. There was no need for fanfare. No applause would ever be needed. Her honor and dignity had been reclaimed through truth, presence, and steady determination. Turning from the fence, her footsteps were light but purposeful as she walked back toward the barracks. The shadows stretched long behind her, but the path ahead was brightened by something far more powerful than any spotlight: unwavering resolve. Mira Hallberg was no longer invisible. She was the embodiment of legacy, discipline, and honor reclaimed. As night settled over Camp Grady, her story, a quiet testament to resilience and strength, would ripple silently through the camp, inspiring those who dared to truly see. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.